Well, hello, and welcome back to my little video series on the Decathlon Rockrider ST520, the $150 Walmart bike. It came from Decathlon USA's warehouse, sold and shipped by Decathlon USA, but I bought it at walmart.com for $150 with free shipping. And so this is third video, something like that, maybe fourth video, I don't know. I think the third video. And so I've done a little bit of trail riding on it, nothing too crazy. It's been doing pretty well on that, but as I've just been kind of riding the bike around the neighborhood and such, I have developed some noise coming from the crank. Now, one thing I have noticed, I've had to tighten the non-drive side crank arm, that one over there, the 8mm Allen bolt, like what you see right there. And so I'm wondering if the crank arm hole, the square tapered hole, has gotten a little bit stretched out from riding it with the bolt a little bit loose. I did check it right when I got the bike and was putting it together and tightened it a little bit, and I've had to tighten it at least one time since then, so I'm not sure if that's the problem. The other issue that I've had on a few bikes in the past, including the previous Decathlon bike that I did some videos on, the ST100, was the bottom bracket cups were not tightened properly from the factory, and they kind of work themselves a little bit looser as you ride, and you start getting creaking noises. So it could be one or the other. I'm going to disassemble, pull the crank, and do some investigation. I'm hoping it is just the bottom bracket cups, because that's a super easy fix. Pull the crank, pull the bottom bracket, grease it, tighten it up, torque it down properly, put it back together, should be good to go. But if it is the crank arm being kind of wallered out, that is a situation that ultimately ends up requiring a new crank arm. Now, if it's just that non-drive side crank arm, you can get a replacement crank arm. May not match perfectly, but you get the right length. It's perfectly functional, and there's no issue with that. But I do have a replacement crankset that I got from Shimano as part of their crankset recall on old like 90s era cranks, and they replace it with more of a modern Shimano tourney crankset, which would actually be right in line with what parts are on this bike. So I may end up throwing that on there, but we'll just have to see. And when I come back at the next cut, we'll know a little bit more what's going on here. Okay, so let me hold the camera the correct way. Sorry. The first thing I've done here is pull the non-drive side crank arm off. So when I was using my extraction tool, it had a lot of resistance. Not too much. I mean, the appropriate amount of resistance. So it definitely wasn't sitting loose on the taper. So that's a good sign that that probably was not the issue. And that taper does look really good right there. So next thing I'm going to do is just get my bottom bracket tool and see if that non-drive side cup is any bit loose. It could be that the drive side cup is loose. I am going to pull this drive side crank arm off as well here in a minute, but that's kind of where we're at. So we'll see what we find out next. Okay, so here we are back, got both crank arms off, and I've checked both bottom bracket cups just quickly with my bottom bracket tool. They seem relatively tight, so at this point I'm kind of, I don't want to say I'm perplexed, but everything isn't really leading me to believe it's the typical loose bottom bracket cup issue that I've seen several times in the past. Bearings feel nice and smooth on this. I don't think that's an issue with, you know, creaky bearings, and there was no slop in the bearings with the crank arms on that I could discern. So what I'm going to do, I am going to pull this bottom bracket out of here, just make sure that it is greased properly, because even if it's tight but they didn't put grease on the threads, you can still get some creaking in some cases. So we're just going to double check it, and hopefully between that and then reassembling, definitely wasn't really any grease on these spindles, so that's another thing that could be creaking too. Just need a little bit of grease between the spindle and the crank arm. I think that can cause some creaking as well. So we'll see what I find. I'll be back in just a minute. All right, let me bring it all back in here for this. So I've got my bottom bracket tool, and then what I always do with this thing, I've got a bolt that's the same thread. I don't remember the thread pitch on crank bolts, but I've found a bolt that is the same thread pitch that I can use to secure this tool to the teeth and the bottom bracket cup, so that way it didn't pull out and torque out. And then I can get my big wrench and, you know, put it on there. So when I did get this on here, this gives me a lot better torquelizations compared to just a socket and not being able to fully engage those teeth securely. And that's not much force at all, so I do think this thing actually is a little bit loose. And I'm going to pull it out, grease it, put it back together nice and tighten down good and tight, and that should take care of the problem. Yeah, drive side also not very tight, so I believe that is our problem. We'll get it done. I think we found the issue. And I'm back again, just in case anybody's interested what kind of bottom bracket they're using here. It's a VP 127.5 millimeter, 68 millimeter width bottom bracket shell, standard what they call English threading, and that's not a bad bottom bracket. VP's decent stuff. So there is grease there, so I think it was just not tightened down quite enough, but I'll put a little bit more grease and should be good to go. All right, everything's back together, and I am satisfied with how everything went back together. Crank arm tightened up nice, everything torqued down good, and I am going to call it fixed unless otherwise I come back after this to advise that it was something else. Unfortunately, we're getting a little bit of rain, and I'm not going to go test ride that right now, so I'm just going to update this video again. If you don't see me come back, then it's fixed. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, comment, ask questions. Thank you very much, and everybody keep the rubber side down.